The rain fell hard on the muddy training ground as General Marcus Blackwood watched the new recruits struggle through their morning drills. His cold gray eyes scanned the group with disgust. These were supposed to be the future soldiers of the Imperial Army? Half of them could barely hold a sword properly. Pathetic, he muttered under his breath, adjusting his decorated uniform. At 52 years old, Blackwood had earned his reputation as the most feared military commander in the kingdom. His methods were brutal, his standards impossible to meet, and his patience thinner than paper. Among the struggling recruits, one figure caught his attention. A young woman, barely 20 years old, moved with unusual grace despite the heavy rain. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she had joined the army 3 months ago under the new recruitment laws that allowed women to serve. Most of the other officers thought it was a joke. Blackwood thought it was an insult. Elena wiped the mud from her face and continued practicing her sword forms. She had grown up on a small farm on the border, where attacks from bandits were common. Her father had taught her to fight out of necessity, not choice. When the recruitment officers came to her village, she saw it as her chance to make something of herself and help protect others like her family. "You there, girl?" Blackwood's voice boomed across the training ground. Elena stopped mid-swing and turned toward him, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. The other recruits stepped back, knowing that when the general singled someone out, it never ended well. Elena straightened her shoulders and walked toward him, her boots squelching in the mud. She had heard the stories about General Blackwood. They said he had once made a recruit run laps until he collapsed from exhaustion just for looking at him wrong. They said he enjoyed breaking people who thought they were strong. "Yes, General," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. Blackwood circled her like a predator studying its prey. "What's your name, recruit?" "Elena Vasquez, sir." "Vasquez," he repeated, drawing out the syllables. "Tell me, Vasquez, what makes you think you belong here with real soldiers?" Elena's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm here to serve my country, sir. Same as everyone else." A cruel smile spread across Blackwood's face. "Same as everyone else? Look around you, girl. Do you see any other women here? Do you know why that is?" "Because they haven't had the opportunity before, sir." "Wrong." His voice cracked like a whip. "Because war is no place for the weak. Because when a real enemy comes, they'll tear through soft little girls like paper. Because you're a liability that will get real soldiers killed." The training ground had gone silent. Even the rain seemed to quiet as every recruit watched the confrontation. Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she kept her expression neutral. "With respect, sir, I believe actions speak louder than assumptions." Blackwood's eyes flashed with anger. No one talked back to him. No one questioned his judgment. And certainly not some farm girl who thought she could play soldier. "Actions, you say? Very well." He gestured to one of his officers. "Sergeant Mills, bring me a practice sword." Sergeant Mills hesitated. "Sir, perhaps we should—" "Did I ask for your opinion, Sergeant?" Blackwood's voice was deadly quiet. "No, sir." Mills quickly retrieved a practice sword and handed it to the general. Blackwood hefted the weapon, testing its weight. It was a standard training sword, made of wood with metal edges for authenticity. In the right hands, it could still cause serious damage. "Since you believe in actions over assumptions, let's see what you're capable of." He pointed the sword at Elena. "Defend yourself." Elena's eyes widened. This wasn't part of any training exercise. This was personal, but she had no choice. Refusing would mean immediate dismissal and disgrace. She picked up her own practice sword, her mind racing. "I don't want to fight you, General. This isn't necessary. What you want is irrelevant, recruit. In war, you don't get to choose when to fight. Now defend yourself, or I'll assume you're admitting your weakness." The other recruits formed a loose circle around them. Some looked excited to see the general in action. Others appeared worried about what they were witnessing. Elena tried to catch the eye of Sergeant Mills, hoping he might intervene, but the man was carefully looking at the ground. Elena raised her sword in a defensive position. Her father had taught her well, but he had been a farmer, not a military strategist. General Blackwood was a veteran of 3 wars and countless battles. The mismatch was obvious to everyone present. Scared already? Blackwood taunted. Maybe you should run home to your little farm where you belong. Elena's grip tightened on her sword. She had left everything behind to be here. She had endured months of harassment and doubt. She wasn't going to give up now, not because of one bitter old man who couldn't accept change. I'm not going anywhere, sir. We'll see about that. Blackwood lunged forward without warning, his sword cutting through the air toward Elena's shoulder. She barely managed to block the strike, the impact sending vibrations up her arms. He was stronger than she had expected, and faster despite his age. He pressed his attack immediately, not giving her time to recover. His sword work was textbook perfect, each strike calculated to exploit an opening or create one. Elena found herself retreating step by step, her blocks becoming more desperate with each exchange. Is this the best you can do? Blackwood sneered as he drove her back. This is what you call serving your country? You can't even defend yourself against an old man. Elena's breathing became labored as she struggled to keep up with his relentless assault. Sweat mixed with rainwater on her face, making it hard to see. Her arms ached from blocking his powerful strikes, and she could feel her form deteriorating under the pressure. The watching recruits began to murmur among themselves. Some shook their heads in disappointment. Others looked away, unable to watch what felt like an execution rather than a training exercise. Blackwood sensed her weakness and increased his intensity. His strikes came faster and harder, pushing Elena to her limits. She stumbled backward, her foot slipping in the mud, and fell hard on her back. In an instant, Blackwood was standing over her, his sword point hovering inches from her throat. Rain dripped from the blade onto her face as she lay gasping in the mud. "Yield," he commanded. "Admit you don't belong here." Elena stared up at him, her chest heaving. Every instinct told her to give up, to say the words that would end this humiliation. But something deep inside her refused to break. She thought of her village, of the bandits who had terrorized them, of all the people who needed protection. "No," she whispered. "What did you say?" "I said no." Elena's voice grew stronger. "I won't yield." Blackwood's face darkened with rage. "Then, you're more foolish than I thought." He raised his sword higher, and for a moment, Elena thought he might actually strike her down. The blade gleamed despite the gray sky, and she could see the fury in his eyes. This had gone beyond a training exercise. This was personal humiliation, and he intended to finish it. But as he brought the sword down, Elena rolled to the side and swept her leg out, catching the general behind his ankle. The move was instinctive, something her father had taught her when facing larger opponents. Use their momentum against them. Blackwood, caught off balance, and, not expecting the maneuver, stumbled forward. His foot slipped in the same patch of mud that had tripped Elena moments before. But unlike her controlled fall, his was awkward and violent. The general went down hard, his sword flying from his grip. There was a sickening crack as his shoulder hit the ground at an unnatural angle. He screamed in pain, a sound that cut through the rain and stunned everyone present into silence. Elena scrambled to her feet, staring in shock at what had happened. General Blackwood, the feared military commander, lay writhing in the mud, clutching his shoulder and moaning in agony. "Medic!" Sergeant Mills finally found his voice. "Someone get a medic now." 2 recruits ran toward the medical station while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Elena remained where she was, her practice sword hanging loose in her hand, watching the man who had seemed so powerful just moments before. Blackwood's face had gone pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold rain. His carefully maintained uniform was now as muddy and disheveled as any recruit's. The shoulder of his jacket was torn, and the decorations that marked his rank were scattered in the dirt. "You?" he gasped, trying to focus on Elena through his pain. "You did this on purpose." Elena shook her head. "No, sir. It was an accident." I was just trying to, liar, he snarled, though the effect was diminished by his obvious agony. You planned this. You wanted to humiliate me. The medics arrived and immediately went to work on the general's shoulder. Their faces were grim as they examined the injury. Elena heard one of them whisper something about dislocation and possible fracture. As they prepared to move him to the medical station, Blackwood fixed Elena with a stare full of hatred and promise. This isn't over, girl. When I recover, I'll make sure you pay for this. I'll make sure you never wear a uniform again. Elena watched as they carried him away, his threats echoing across the training ground. The other recruits slowly dispersed, casting uncertain glances in her direction. Some looked at her with newfound respect, others with fear of association. Sergeant Mills approached her, his expression unreadable. Recruit Vasquez. Yes, sir. Clean up this mess and report to Captain Harrison immediately. Am I in trouble, sir? Mills looked in the direction where they had taken the general, then back at Elena. I honestly don't know, recruit, but I suspect your real training is about to begin. As Elena bent to collect the scattered practice swords, her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline still coursing through her system. She had stood up to General Blackwood and survived, but she also knew that surviving was only the first step. The rain continued to fall as she made her way toward Captain Harrison's office, each step taking her further into an uncertain future. Behind her, the training ground was empty except for the churned mud and the memory of what had happened. What Elena didn't know was that several other officers had witnessed the entire confrontation from the observation deck of the command building. What she also didn't know was that Captain Harrison had been expecting this confrontation for weeks, and that her real test was just beginning. The mud on her uniform would wash off. The bruises from the fight would heal. But the reputation she had earned in those few minutes would follow her for the rest of her military career, for better or worse. Captain William Harrison was reviewing training reports when a knock came at his door. He had been expecting this visit ever since he received word about the incident on the training ground. Through his office window, he had watched the entire confrontation between General Blackwood and Recruit Vasquez unfold. Enter, he called out, not looking up from his papers. Elena stepped into the office, still wearing her mud-stained uniform. She stood at attention, her back straight despite the exhaustion she felt. Captain Harrison was younger than General Blackwood, perhaps in his late 30s, with kind eyes and graying temples that suggested wisdom beyond his years. At ease, recruit. Harrison finally looked up from his desk. Please sit down. Elena remained standing. If it's all the same to you, sir, I'd prefer to stand. Harrison studied her for a moment, noting the determination in her posture despite everything she had just been through. Very well. I suppose you know why you're here. I assume it's about what happened with General Blackwood, sir. Indeed it is. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Tell me, Recruit Vasquez, what did you think of the general's training methods today? Elena hesitated. This felt like a trap. Speaking ill of a superior officer could result in immediate dismissal or worse. But lying seemed equally dangerous. Sir, I believe the general was testing my resolve and abilities under pressure. Is that what you call it? Harrison's expression remained neutral. Testing? Yes, sir. Harrison stood and walked to his window, gazing out at the training ground where maintenance crews were already working to repair the churned mud. Recruit Vasquez, I'm going to tell you something that very few people in this army know. General Blackwood has been under investigation for his training methods for the past 6 months. Elena's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this revelation. There have been 17 formal complaints filed against him in the past year alone. Excessive force, psychological harassment, deliberate endangerment of recruits. But General Blackwood is a war hero with powerful friends. Complaints alone weren't enough to take action. Harrison turned back to face her. What happened today, however, was witnessed by multiple officers, including myself. It was not a training exercise. It was a personal vendetta carried out under the guise of military discipline. Sir, I don't understand. Are you saying, I'm saying that what you did today, intentional or not, may have saved other recruits from suffering the same treatment. General Blackwood's injury will keep him out of commission for several weeks, possibly months. Elena felt a weight lifting from her chest. She had been prepared for punishment, disgrace, even court-martial. Instead, it seemed she had inadvertently done something right. However, Harrison continued, his tone becoming more serious. There will be consequences. General Blackwood still has influence in this army, and he will undoubtedly seek revenge when he recovers. Your position here is now precarious. What do you recommend, sir? Harrison smiled for the first time since she had entered the office. I recommend you become the best soldier this army has ever seen. Excellence is the only armor that will protect you from his retaliation. Over the following weeks, Elena threw herself into her training with renewed determination. Word of what had happened spread throughout the military base like wildfire, growing and changing with each telling. Some versions painted her as a hero who had stood up to a bully. Others depicted her as a dangerous troublemaker who had attacked a superior officer. The reactions from her fellow recruits were mixed. Some began treating her with respect, even seeking her advice during training exercises. Others avoided her entirely, afraid of being associated with someone who had crossed General Blackwood. A few openly resented her, believing she had brought unwanted attention to their unit. Elena found an unexpected ally in Sergeant Mills, who began providing her with additional training during off hours. Mills had served under Blackwood for 3 years and had witnessed firsthand the general's increasingly erratic behavior. The general wasn't always like this, Mills explained one evening as they practiced combat techniques in the empty training hall. When I first served under him, he was strict but fair. The wars changed him. Each campaign made him harder, more bitter. What happened to him? Elena asked, adjusting her stance as Mills had shown her. He lost a lot of good soldiers. Young soldiers, many of them not much older than you. I think seeing them die made him believe that being harsh was the only way to prepare recruits for the reality of war. Elena paused in her practice. Do you think he was right? About me not belonging here? Mills considered the question carefully. I think the general sees the army as it was, not as it could be. Change frightens him because he's seen too much death. But fear isn't a good teacher, Elena. Respect is. During this period, Elena also received an unexpected visit from her younger brother, Miguel, who had traveled from their village to check on her. Miguel was 18, with the same dark eyes as Elena, but a gentle nature that made him unsuited for military life. Papa is worried about you, Miguel said as they sat in the mess hall during visiting hours. The stories that have reached our village, they make it sound like you're in danger. Elena looked around at the other soldiers eating their meals, some still casting curious glances in her direction. I won't lie to you, Miguel. It hasn't been easy, but I'm learning things here that I never could have learned on the farm. Like how to make enemies of powerful men. Like how to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Miguel shook his head. Elena, you always were too stubborn for your own good. Mama used to say it would get you in trouble someday. Maybe, but it might also help me protect people someday. Isn't that worth the risk? Before Miguel could answer, a commotion erupted across the mess hall. A group of senior recruits had cornered a younger soldier, a boy who couldn't have been more than 17 years old. Elena recognized him as Thomas Chun, one of the newest arrivals who had joined just the week before. Please, I don't want any trouble, Thomas was saying, his voice shaking as the older recruits loomed over him. You should have thought of that before you made us look bad in front of Sergeant Mills, one of the senior recruits, a large man named Rodriguez, snarled. Your pathetic performance during drills is making our entire unit look weak. Elena watched the scene unfold, her jaw tightening. She could see the fear in Thomas's eyes, the same fear she had felt when facing General Blackwood. The other soldiers in the mess hall were pointedly ignoring what was happening, not wanting to get involved. Elena, don't, Miguel whispered, recognizing the look in his sister's eyes. This isn't your fight. But Elena was already standing up from her table. The lessons Sergeant Mills had been teaching her about leadership echoed in her mind. Sometimes standing up for what was right meant making yourself a target. Rodriguez, she called out, her voice carrying across the mess hall. Leave him alone. Rodriguez turned to face her, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Well, if it isn't the general's girl. Still playing hero, Vasquez. I'm not playing anything. Thomas is part of our unit, which means we protect each other. That's how armies work. Rodriguez stepped away from Thomas and approached Elena, his two companions flanking him. Is that so? And who's going to protect you when you bite off more than you can chew? Elena could feel the tension in the room ratcheting up. Conversations had stopped, and all eyes were on the confrontation. She was aware that how she handled this moment would define her reputation among the soldiers. I don't need protection from bullies, she replied calmly. And neither does Thomas. Rodriguez laughed. You think because you got lucky with the general, you're some kind of tough fighter? I've been in this army for 4 years, Vasquez. I've seen real combat. You're just a farm girl playing dress-up. Then prove it, Elena said quietly. Unless you prefer picking on boys half your size. The challenge hung in the air between them. Rodriguez's face darkened as he realized she had maneuvered him into a position where backing down would make him look weak in front of the entire mess hall. Fine, he growled. You want to play soldier? Let's play soldier. The mess hall had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to watch. Elena could see Sergeant Mills entering through the far door, but he was too far away to intervene immediately. Rodriguez lunged forward, throwing a punch aimed at Elena's face. But weeks of intensive training with Sergeant Mills had sharpened Elena's reflexes. She ducked under the swing and stepped to the side, using Rodriguez's momentum to send him stumbling past her. Rodriguez spun around, anger flashing in his eyes. Lucky dodge. Let's see how you handle this. He came at her again, this time more cautiously, his fists raised in a proper fighting stance. Elena realized that he did indeed have combat experience. His movements were practiced, economical. This wasn't going to be as simple as her accidental victory over General Blackwood. Rodriguez threw a series of quick jabs, testing her defenses. Elena managed to block most of them, but one caught her on the shoulder, sending pain shooting down her arm. Rodriguez smiled at her reaction and pressed his attack. Elena found herself being driven backward, much as she had been during her confrontation with General Blackwood. But this time, she wasn't panicking. Her training with Sergeant Mills had taught her to stay calm under pressure, to look for opportunities rather than just trying to survive. Rodriguez overcommit to a powerful right hook, leaving his left side exposed. Elena slipped inside his guard and delivered a sharp elbow to his ribs. Rodriguez gasped and staggered back, surprise replacing the confidence on his face. Not bad, he admitted, rubbing his side. But not good enough. He changed tactics, trying to grab Elena and use his superior size and strength to overpower her. But Elena had learned from her father how to fight larger opponents. She used Rodriguez's own momentum against him, stepping aside and helping him along into a nearby table. The crash of Rodriguez hitting the furniture seemed to break the spell that had held the mess hall in silence. Suddenly, everyone was shouting, some cheering for Elena, others for Rodriguez. The two companions who had been with Rodriguez moved to join the fight, but they were blocked by other soldiers who wanted to see a fair match. Rodriguez pushed himself up from the broken table, his face red with embarrassment and anger. You think you're clever, don't you? But this is just the beginning. You've made an enemy today, Vasquez. I didn't make an enemy, Elena replied, not backing down despite the threat. I just showed one his true face. Rodriguez raised his fist for another attack, but Sergeant Mills's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. That's enough. All of you, stand down immediately. The mess hall fell silent as Sergeant Mills strode through the crowd. His face was thunderous as he surveyed the scene. The broken furniture, the scattered food, and the two soldiers facing off in the center of it all. Rodriguez, Vasquez, my office. Now, the rest of you, clean up this mess and get back to your duties. Anyone I catch discussing this incident will find themselves on kitchen duty for the next month. As Elena followed Sergeant Mills and Rodriguez out of the mess hall, she caught sight of her brother Miguel watching her with a mixture of pride and concern. She also noticed something else. Thomas Chun was standing straighter now, and several other younger recruits were looking at her with something approaching admiration. The walk to Sergeant Mills's office was conducted in complete silence. Elena's mind raced as she tried to anticipate what punishment awaited her. Fighting in a mess hall was a serious violation of military discipline, regardless of the circumstances. Mills closed his office door behind them and turned to face the two recruits. His expression was unreadable as he studied them for a long moment. "Rodriguez," he said finally, "you've been in this army long enough to know better. Harassment of junior recruits is not tolerated, regardless of their performance." "Sergeant, I was just trying to motivate. You were trying to intimidate." Mills cut him off. "There's a difference, and you know it. Report to Captain Harrison first thing tomorrow morning. He'll decide your punishment." Rodriguez's face fell. A meeting with Captain Harrison rarely went well for soldiers who had been causing trouble. He shot a venomous look at Elena before snapping to attention. "Yes, Sergeant." Dismissed. Rodriguez left the office, his footsteps heavy with resentment. Elena remained standing at attention, waiting for her own judgment. Mills waited until the door closed before speaking again. "Elena, what you did today was both brave and foolish." "I understand, Sergeant. Do you? Because I'm not sure you fully grasp the position you're putting yourself in. Rodriguez has friends in this army, men who served together for years and who look out for each other. By standing up to him, you've made their conflict your conflict." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Then, maybe it's time someone did, sir. How many Thomas Chins have to suffer before someone stands up?" Mills sighed and sat down behind his desk. "You remind me of someone I used to know, a young lieutenant who thought he could change the army single-handedly. He had your sense of justice, your unwillingness to back down from what was right. What happened to him?" "He became Captain Harrison," Mills said with a slight smile. "But it took years, Elena. Years of proving himself, of picking his battles carefully, of building alliances with the right people. Change doesn't happen overnight in the military." Elena considered this. "So what do I do now?" "You continue training. You become excellent at your job. And you remember that every action has consequences, not just for you, but for everyone around you." That evening, as Elena sat on her bunk writing a letter to her parents, Thomas Chun approached her hesitantly. "Recruit Vasquez?" Elena looked up from her letter. "What is it, Thomas?" "I wanted to thank you for what you did today. No one has ever stood up for me like that before." Elena set down her pen and studied the young soldier. He was small for his age, with an intelligent face that reminded her of her brother Miguel. "You don't need to thank me, Thomas. We're all in this together. Rodriguez is going to make trouble for you because of what happened." "I'm sorry about that. Rodriguez was already going to make trouble for me. At least now it's for the right reason." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Is there anything I can do? To help, I mean." Elena smiled. "Just focus on becoming the best soldier you can be. That's how we all help each other in the end." As Thomas walked away, Elena returned to her letter. But her words to her parents seemed inadequate to describe everything that was happening to her. How could she explain that she was discovering who she was meant to be in a place where half the people wanted her to fail? Outside her barracks window, she could see lights in the medical building where General Blackwood was recovering from his injuries. Soon he would return to duty, and when he did, he would undoubtedly seek his revenge. Rodriguez and his allies would continue to test her resolve. The challenges would only grow more difficult. But Elena was no longer the uncertain farm girl who had arrived at the base months ago. She was becoming something new, something stronger. And she was beginning to understand that her real battle wasn't just about proving she belonged in the army. It was about changing what the army could become. 6 weeks had passed since General Blackwood's injury, when the alarm bells began ringing across the military base. Elena jolted awake in her bunk, her heart pounding as the urgent clanging echoed through the barracks. Around her, other soldiers were scrambling to get dressed and grab their equipment. "What's happening?" Thomas Chin asked, his voice tight with anxiety as he fumbled with his boots. "Border alert," replied Marcus Webb, a more experienced soldier who had been at the base for 2 years. "Could be bandits, could be enemy scouts. Either way, this isn't a drill." Elena quickly pulled on her uniform, her mind sharp despite being awakened so abruptly. Over the past weeks, her training had intensified under Sergeant Mills's guidance. She had grown stronger, faster, and more confident. But this would be her first real test outside of training exercises. The soldiers assembled in the main courtyard within minutes, their formations crisp despite the early hour. Captain Harrison stood before them, his expression grave in the pale morning light. "Intelligence reports indicate a large bandit force has crossed our southern border," he announced. "Approximately 40 to 50 armed raiders are moving toward the village of San Miguel, where many of your families live." Elena's blood ran cold. San Miguel was her home village, where her parents and brother Miguel still lived. The same village she had left to join the army, so she could protect places exactly like it. "We have 2 hours to reach the village before the raiders arrive," Captain Harrison continued. "This is not a training exercise. These are desperate men with nothing to lose, and they will show no mercy to civilians." Questions? A hand raised from the back of the formation. "Sir, what about General Blackwood? Shouldn't he be leading this mission?" Elena's stomach clenched. She had almost forgotten about the general in the urgency of the moment. Blackwood had returned to limited duty just the week before, his arms still in a sling, but his authority intact. "General Blackwood will be joining us," Harrison replied. Despite his injury, he insisted on participating in this operation. As if summoned by his name, General Blackwood appeared at the edge of the courtyard. His left arm was bound tightly to his chest, and his face was paler than Elena remembered, but his eyes held the same cold intensity. When his gaze found Elena in the formation, she could see the promise of reckoning burning there. "Move out in 10 minutes, Harrison ordered. "Full combat gear. We travel light and fast." Elena hurried to gather her equipment, her hands shaking slightly as she checked her rifle and ammunition. This was what she had trained for, but the reality of heading into actual combat felt different from all the exercises and drills. "Elena," a familiar voice called out. She turned to see her friend Sarah Martinez, another female recruit who had joined the army around the same time. Sarah had become one of Elena's closest allies during the difficult weeks following the incident with General Blackwood. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, noting Elena's pale complexion. "It's my village, Sarah. My family is there." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. "Then, we'll make sure we get there in time. All of us." Elena nodded, drawing strength from her friend's support. As they made their final preparations, she noticed several of the soldiers looking at her with something approaching respect. Word had spread about her confrontation with Rodriguez in the mess hall, and many of the younger recruits now saw her as someone who would stand up for them. The march to San Miguel began before dawn, with the soldiers moving at a grueling pace through the rough terrain. General Blackwood, despite his injury, kept up with the column, though Elena could see the strain on his face. Sergeant Mills led the advanced scout team, while Captain Harrison coordinated with intelligence units via radio. 3 hours into the march, they received updated intelligence. The bandit force was larger than initially reported, closer to 60 men, well-armed and organized. They had already hit 2 smaller settlements, leaving destruction in their wake. "They're not just raiders," Captain Harrison explained during a brief rest stop. "These appear to be deserters from the enemy army, probably including some experienced soldiers. They'll fight harder and smarter than typical bandits." Elena felt her anxiety spike. She had trained to fight other recruits and participate in exercises, but facing experienced enemy soldiers was an entirely different challenge. Around her, she could see similar concerns on the faces of her fellow soldiers, especially the newer recruits. General Blackwood limped over to where the younger soldiers were gathered. Despite everything that had happened between them, Elena found herself listening to his words. "I know some of you are scared," he said, his voice carrying the authority of years of command. "Fear is natural. I'd be more worried if you weren't afraid. But remember your training. Trust your fellow soldiers. Follow orders without hesitation. His eyes found Elena in the group. In combat, personal differences don't matter. We all wear the same uniform, and we all have the same mission: protect the innocent and support each other. Elena met his gaze, uncertainty flickering in her chest. Was this an olive branch, or was he planning something? She couldn't read his expression, but she nodded in acknowledgement anyway. They reached the outskirts of San Miguel just as the sun reached its peak. The village looked peaceful from their vantage point on the surrounding hills, with smoke rising from cooking fires and people going about their daily activities. But intelligence reports indicated the bandit force was less than an hour away. Captain Harrison divided his forces into 3 groups. One would set up defensive positions on the main road into the village. Another would circle around to cut off potential escape routes. The third, including Elena, would evacuate civilians and establish a safe zone behind the village chapel. Remember, Harrison addressed the assembled soldiers. Our primary goal is protecting civilians. Don't take unnecessary risks trying to be heroes. As they moved into position, Elena caught sight of her family's farm on the edge of the village. She could see her father working in the fields, completely unaware of the approaching danger. Every instinct screamed at her to run to them immediately, but she forced herself to follow orders and stick with her assigned group. The evacuation began smoothly, with soldiers going door to door to move families to the safety of the chapel area. Elena's group was responsible for the eastern section of the village, which included her family's farm. When she reached her childhood home, her mother Maria was hanging laundry on the line. At the sight of Elena in full combat gear, Maria dropped the wet clothes and ran to embrace her daughter. "Elena, what are you doing here? What's happening?" "Mama, there's no time to explain everything. Bandits are coming, and we need to get everyone to safety. Where are Papa and Miguel?" "Your father is in the back field, and Miguel went to the market in the town center." Elena's heart sank. Miguel was exactly where the fighting was most likely to occur. "Mama, I need you to go to the chapel right now. Other soldiers will help you. I have to find Miguel and Papa." "Elena, it's too dangerous. I'm a soldier now, Mama. This is what I trained for." Elena kissed her mother's cheek and ran toward the backfield where her father was working. Pablo Vasquez was exactly where she expected to find him, tending to the vegetable garden that helped feed their family. "Papa," she called out as she approached. Pablo looked up, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of his daughter. "Elena, what a wonderful surprise. But why are you in uniform? Is this some kind of military exercise?" Elena quickly explained the situation while helping her father gather the tools he insisted on bringing. Pablo's expression grew serious as he understood the gravity of the threat. "Miguel is in the market," Elena explained as they hurried toward the village center. "I need to find him and make sure he's safe." "Your brother is smart," Pablo said, though worry creased his features. "He'll know to hide if there's trouble." They reached the market area just as the first shots rang out from the main road. The bandit force had arrived ahead of schedule, and the battle was beginning. Civilians screamed and ran in all directions as the organized evacuation plan dissolved into chaos. Elena drew her rifle and scanned the crowd desperately for any sign of Miguel. Market stalls were overturning as people fled, and in the distance, she could see muzzle flashes where her fellow soldiers were engaging the enemy. "There!" Pablo pointed toward the blacksmith shop. "I see Miguel." Elena followed her father's gaze and spotted her brother helping an elderly woman who had fallen during the panic. Even in the midst of chaos, Miguel was thinking of others. It was exactly what she would have expected from him. But between them and Miguel, a group of armed bandits had entered the market square. They were advancing systematically, clearly looking for valuables and hostages. Elena counted 5 men, all carrying military-grade weapons. "Papa, get to the chapel," Elena ordered. "Now! I'm not leaving without you and Miguel." "Papa, please. I can't do my job if I'm worried about protecting you. Trust me. Pablo looked at his daughter, seeing not the farm girl who had left months ago, but a trained soldier who knew what she was doing. Reluctantly, he nodded and began making his way toward the chapel. Elena moved carefully through the chaos toward Miguel, using overturned stalls and abandoned carts as cover. Her training kicked in, and she found herself analyzing the tactical situation automatically. The bandits were spread out, but moving predictably. She could probably reach Miguel without being seen if she was careful. But as she crept closer, one of the bandits spotted Miguel helping the elderly woman. The man raised his rifle, and Elena realized with horror that he was about to shoot her brother. Without thinking, Elena broke cover and sprinted toward them, shouting to get the bandits' attention. "Hey, over here!" The bandit turned toward her, giving Miguel time to pull the elderly woman behind a stone wall. But now Elena was exposed in the middle of the market square, facing 5 armed men with nowhere to hide. Well, one of the bandits called out, a large man with scars across his face who was clearly their leader. "What do we have here? A little soldier girl?" Elena raised her rifle, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Let the civilians go. Your fight is with the army, not with innocent people." The bandit leader laughed. "You're going to tell us what to do? You look like you're barely old enough to hold that rifle." "Age doesn't matter when you're looking down the barrel," Elena replied, her voice calmer than she felt. The standoff stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Elena was outnumbered 5-1, but she had the advantage of training and position. If she was smart about it, she might be able to gunshot crack through the air, but it didn't come from the bandits. One of the men suddenly stumbled and fell, clutching his shoulder. From behind Elena, she heard a familiar voice. "Nobody threatens my soldiers." Elena glanced back to see General Blackwood approaching, his rifle smoking despite his injured arm, making it difficult to aim. Behind him came Sergeant Mills and 3 other soldiers, having fought their way through the market to reach her position. The remaining bandits, seeing themselves suddenly outnumbered, tried to flee. But Elena's fellow soldiers had positioned themselves to cut off escape routes. Within minutes, the skirmish was over, with the surviving bandits either captured or driven away. As the shooting stopped, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. Miguel emerged from behind the stone wall, his eyes wide with amazement at what his sister had just done. "Elena," he said, running to embrace her. "You saved us." Elena hugged her brother tightly, relief flooding through her. "We saved each other. That's what families do." General Blackwood approached them, his expression unreadable. Elena tensed, unsure what to expect from the man who had made her life so difficult. "Recruit Vasquez," he said formally. "Yes, General." Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Around them, other soldiers were helping evacuate the remaining civilians and securing the area. "What you did here today, placing yourself at risk to protect civilians, that was the action of a true soldier." Elena blinked in surprise. "Sir, I owe you an apology, recruit. I let my prejudices and my pain from past losses cloud my judgment about your capabilities. You've proven today that courage and honor aren't determined by gender or background." Elena stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. "General, I was wrong about you," Blackwood continued, "and I was wrong about my methods. What happened between us on that training ground? I let my anger and frustration get the better of me. That's not the kind of leader I want to be." Elena felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Sir, we all make mistakes." "Yes, but some mistakes hurt people more than others." Blackwood extended his uninjured hand to her. "Can we start over, soldier to soldier?" Elena took his hand without hesitation. "Yes, sir. I'd like that." Sergeant Mills approached them, a smile on his face. "The village is secure, General. The bandit force has been completely routed, and I have to say Recruit Vasquez's actions here today show remarkable tactical thinking and personal courage." "I agree," Blackwood said. In fact, I think it's time Recruit Vasquez moved beyond basic training. Sergeant Mills, I want you to recommend her for advanced leadership courses. Elena's eyes widened. Sir, I don't know if I'm ready for... The best time to learn leadership is when you're already demonstrating it naturally, Blackwood interrupted. You've shown today that you have the instincts. Now we'll give you the training to match. Over the following hours, as the village was secured and the evacuation areas were cleared, Elena found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She had entered the army months ago as an uncertain farm girl trying to prove she belonged. Today, she had not only proven her worth, but had earned the respect of the man who had been her greatest obstacle. Thomas Chin found her as she was helping her parents pack a few belongings for their temporary relocation to a safer area. Elena, he said, his young face bright with admiration. What you did today was incredible. You faced down 5 armed men by yourself. I wasn't by myself, Elena corrected him. I had all of you watching my back. That's what being part of an army means. Still, Thomas insisted, you're going to be famous. Everyone's going to hear about the recruit who saved her village and changed General Blackwood's mind. Elena smiled, but she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with that recognition. Fame isn't the goal, Thomas. Protecting people is. Making sure soldiers like you have good leaders is. Making the army better for everyone is. As evening fell over San Miguel, Elena stood with her family outside their farm, watching the last of the military vehicles preparing to return to base. The village was safe, the immediate threat was over, and she would soon return to her duties. But everything had changed. General Blackwood approached her one final time before departure. Recruit Vasquez, I want you to know that your actions today will be formally recognized. You'll be receiving a commendation for bravery, and your promotion to corporal is effective immediately. Thank you, sir. But the real reward is knowing my family and neighbors are safe. Blackwood nodded approvingly. That's exactly the attitude I want to see in my officers. You have a bright future ahead of you, Corporal Vasquez. The Army is changing, and leaders like you will help guide that change. As Elena climbed into the transport vehicle with her fellow soldiers, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. The uncertain young woman who had first stood on the training ground months ago was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, more sure of her purpose. Miguel waved goodbye from the farmhouse steps, pride evident on his face. Her parents stood beside him, no longer worried about their daughter's choice to join the army. They had seen what she had become, and they understood that she was exactly where she belonged. The vehicle pulled away from San Miguel as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Elena settled back in her seat, surrounded by comrades who respected her, heading back to a base where she was no longer an outsider, but a valued member of the team. She had faced down bandits, earned the respect of a former enemy, and proven that strength came in many forms. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned that true courage wasn't about fighting alone. It was about standing up for others, even when the odds seemed impossible. The girl who had once been called weak had become a soldier, a leader, and a protector. And this was just the beginning of her story.